Are you ready? Hi, welcome. Alhamdulillah, it is so good to see you. I'm so excited that you are here. I am grateful and thankful to be able to meet you here again. Those of you who have been following the interview series, this is the fourth in our series. So by all means, get ready. We will be starting in 4 minutes. We have our guest for this evening waiting in the studio already for you. We hope that you will gain the maximum from this. And before we begin, just like to apologize to you about the link that I sent this morning regarding the handout that Encik Muazzam has given to you. I sent you the wrong link, so sorry about that. I'm sorry. So you have on the screen the new link. This is the link to the material. This is the link to the material that has been provided. So go ahead, you can download it. And as you go through that material, you may want to ask questions later. So if you notice, what happens is that any comments that you put up, any questions, just put in the comment section over there, and I'll be able to respond to those. So that is what I would like you to do, just to put it there. So those of you who are already here, just put in your comments, hi or hello, so that I know that you're there. Just so excited to be meeting you. In a short while, we are going to start the interview formally, and when we start that, I will introduce our guest to all of you once we start that. Hi, Jessica. Good to see that you're here. And Shaima. Oh, wow. Thank you for commenting that. I know that I'm meeting you here. Alhamdulillah. So, Shaima, you're here. Is Grasshopper there, or has she already gone to sleep? Wow. So, in about 2 minutes, we will start the interview proper. What we have been doing is that we are, for those of you who are joining for the first time, we are inviting people to this interview sessions, and in a short while, our guest for this evening is Mohd Muazzam Mohamed. He's the CEO of Bank Islam Malaysia Berhad and BIMB Holdings Berhad. So when we start the session in a short while, I will give the full description to our guest, and I'm so excited to hear from him, because as we went through this pandemic, one of the major impact of the pandemic is not just the health. The long-term impact is also the economic impact. So this is where the relevance of Muazzam, when we introduce the reason why I'm bringing him up here. So it's about almost time for us to start. So welcome to the interview series on going beyond survival to long-term sustainable holistic wealth. Muazzam, thank you for being here. Really appreciate your being here.
Okay, Assalamualaikum and a very good evening. I'm also equally happy to be here, and probably for the first time meeting some of you. I'll spend the next 1 hour, hopefully, to go through some of the topics that is planned today. But I think to make it a lot more lively, interactive, anyway, it's a weekend anyway. So if you can take it a bit more casual, because the topic itself is going to be quite heavy, I think, but we take it a bit casual. Feel free to ask questions along the way. It could be specifically relating to what I'll be talking about. It could be slightly different as long as it's within the ambit of financial assistance, state of the economy, and all that. I think hopefully there's something that I can share as well.
Okay, thank you. So before we begin the interview proper, the topic for this today's interview is reliefs for SMEs affected by COVID-19. And as what I have mentioned, that in this series, we invite experts from various backgrounds to inform about the impact of the crisis from their expertise. So the tagline is valuable people sharing valuable information. And the reason why I started to do that is because when we have this pandemic, we need to navigate our lives from being informed, from information. Now, the thing about the internet is that there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation. Yeah. So that's why I'm inviting experts to come in to talk from their area of expertise. And for the benefit of the audience that we have this evening, I would just like to give a short introduction to our guest. Encik Muazzam is currently the CEO of Bank Islam and BIMB Holdings, Berhad. He joined Bank Islam in May 2015 as the CFO and was promoted to CEO in December 2018. Prior to that, he was a partner of KPMG, where he spent 18 years in various roles covering audit and consulting for projects in both the public and private sector. And that is why I like again to say welcome to Muazzam to being here. What we are anticipating is anticipating some useful knowledge that because during this crisis, we are not just talking about the employees who are facing the brunt, their employers, the SMEs. And there is that cascade effect. When SMEs are affected, their employees will be affected. So that's why I'm very grateful. I'm very thankful that you are here with us this evening. So maybe I can just shoot off with the first question. Basically, what is the relevance? And it is quite obvious, but let me just ask that question anyway. What is the relevance of this topic in the context of the crisis that we are currently facing?
Okay, because I think, thank you for the question. If you look at it in terms of what's happening today, yeah, I think this is the first time for many of us in our lifetime that we have to go through a health situation, which is now called a health crisis and is even called a pandemic, that affects greatly people's livelihood because it affects the economic side of the activities. Based on some readings, right, the last time that the world experienced this was back in the early 1900s, Spanish flu. That was the last time that we had this, but many of us were not there at that time. So this is the first time. So when you talk about what's happening now, the situation is, I would say, quite severe, rather interesting in the sense that a health situation prevents people from going out to do their normal daily lives, normal daily activities. And that has caused the economy to almost come to a standstill. And in fact, if you look at it globally, so this thing, what's happening, yeah, I'd like to share that I'm sure it's common knowledge that it's happening in other countries as well. So it's about the time when we were reporting more number of cases, and the government was doing something to slow down in terms of the rate of infection and all that, and they imposed the lockdown. That was also about the time that other countries are doing something similar. Obviously, China started earlier, so the impact is felt by their economy a lot earlier, right? And because of that, what we are seeing now is that the health situation affects the economy and it's happening globally. And in fact, when we read a more recent report by the IMF, yeah, IMF is predicting that the global economy, so we're not just talking about Malaysia economy, we're talking about the global economy, is going to be in a recessionary mode starting this year. Okay, the last time it happened was back in 2008. If you recall, that was during the global financial crisis, right? So there was also an impact to the Malaysian economy, but global economy in terms of this kind of impact, it was way back then. So, so based on the latest report by the IMF, it's saying that for 2020, there'll be a recession, that the global economy will decline by about 3%. But this 3% is a global economy if we dissect it, right? The impact is going to be a lot more felt by the advanced economies. And by advanced economies, I'm talking about countries such as US, the European countries, Japan, Canada, UK, for example. And we will see that the impact, even though I mentioned just now, global economy is going to contract by 3% in 2020, bigger impact in the advanced economy because IMF report is saying that for the advanced countries, their contraction, the decline in their economic growth is at a rate of -6%. Okay, so global economy -3%, advanced economies at the rate of -6%. All right, some of the countries are going to felt higher. For example, countries such as Italy and Spain, where the situation is a lot more severe, and it happened a bit earlier in the year. So their contraction is going to be at about 7%. Some other countries such as Germany, which is slightly better in managing, the impact is going to be slightly smaller in terms of, but it's still going to be a contraction. It's not about growth. Yeah, typically we'll be talking about economic growth, GDP growth. It's just a matter of whether is it going to be a 3% growth or is it a 5% growth, right? And any economy, modern economy today require economic growth. So, any negative growth is not good. As -6% growth in the advanced economy is going to be bad. All right. However, the impact to the emerging economies, emerging market is going to be slightly less severe, but it's still going to be a recession at a rate of about -1%. And if you look at the rate how we're going, is that really since 2018 and 2019, actually our economy has been growing at a slower pace. Previously, it was brought about by the impact of the trade war that's happening, between the US and the China, and US not allowing China products to come in and all that. So that to a certain extent affected the growth. However, the effect of this pandemic just make it worse. And when we look at the advanced economies, right? Interestingly, if you look at but unsurprisingly, if you look at economies such as China, because they were the one that felt the effect of COVID, right? And they were the first to go into a lockdown. So the negative growth for them this year is going to be a lot bigger. The interesting thing is that China, being the second largest economy, they were also part of the country that helps towards the global economic growth. Okay, so if you look at it, the global growth has been around 3 to 4%, but China economy has been growing at more than 6% in a year. However, in 2020, their contraction is going to be at about -6% in the first quarter of 2020. Yeah, that's what we see. So we expect that going to be a lot worse going forward. So yeah, I mean the context of COVID and the context of the economic activity they are interlinked, and in a way, our economy contraction, a lot of it is caused by people now not able to go out and do their work.
So interesting that, because when you talk about the contraction in the economy, so if we are anticipating say about 1% contraction for Malaysia, so what does that relate to the man on the street? How would he experience a change in his life or living in terms of what, unemployment, or how would that translate to the man on the street?
Yeah, actually, if you look at it actually around us, and we can see that, for example, any modern economy requires economic growth. It requires certain level of inflation. It requires as well in terms of confidence of the people in the economy. All right, because and they're all interlinked. Okay, so the fact that if the economy is not growing, the implication to the man on the street is going to be multiplied. It's going to be magnified. Why do I say that? Because a lot of it also have got to do with confidence. Like when people expect that the economy is going to be slower or it's going to contract, people will be less willing to spend. People will be less willing to even invest because they want to save money for the rainy days. But modern economy requires spending. Okay, requires spending. Whether is it for operating expenditure, you spend for consumption, or you spend for investment, right? And more so that we feel the impact of confidence in the economy will be felt greater for an economy such as Malaysia, because if I can just share, for example, Malaysian economic growth in the past has been fueled by consumption, private consumption. So, for example, last year, our economic growth was at about 4.7% overall, but our private consumption was 6.5%. So in a way, I mean, the component of the economic growth, that there are quite a number. There's private consumption, there's the public consumption, there's the public investment and all that, right? But the catalyst for the economic for Malaysia, a lot of it depends on the private consumption. So when the economy is slowing down, people are a lot more hesitant to spend, for whatever it is. And that's going to have a chain effect, because businesses are going to feel it, okay, and then that will affect definitely the employment. So it's not difficult for us to see the example of what we're seeing today. For example, many businesses are unable to even operate, right? And because of that, they have got to let go of, for example, the employees. People have got to take pay cuts and all that, and all these are just going to make it worse, because it means that there's less money in the economy, that people spend less, there's going to less money, and it will make it will cause the decline to go even faster.
Okay, so what I'm also noticing is that, for example, in terms of numbers, because like in Malaysia, I'm not aware of the numbers, but for example, in the States, they have this unemployment office whereby we get to know the number of people unemployed and all that. And now they are already at 38 million, which is more than the whole population of Malaysia. So when you mentioned that with the economic crisis, some companies having to let go of their staff, some companies have totally have got to close down. What about the number of unemployment? What has happened to that? If you have any figures.
Okay, based on the latest data that we receive, we are looking at, before this, our Malaysian economy in terms of unemployment was in the low 2%. Now, I think it was reported that it's gone up, inch up to about 4%. So in terms of, so percentage-wise, it doesn't look that big. I mean, number-wise, probably we have not seen the full effect yet at this point in time, because it also depends on people reporting and going and ask for example, all these allowances, right? The scheme and all that for unemployment. But it's interesting to note that when we talk about employment in Malaysia, and especially in the last 3 years, the concept of employment is slightly different. Because, for example, in the past, when we talk about employment, is formal employment. People receive salary when they work with companies. Whereas for now, a lot of the employment really about self-employment. In the gig economy, many more people are self-employing themselves, right? For example, so this part may not have been taken into consideration at this point in time, because a bigger proportion, in a way, because when you look at the percentage of the employment, we also need to look at the proportion to the the workforce, proportion of the workforce. In the past, higher proportion of the workforce are actually salaried staff, whereas now there's more proportion of people within the self-employed sector, and this may not be fully quantified in terms of the employment or rather unemployment percentage, right? But we can see that from what is reported of what happened due to the MCO and CMCO and all that, people who are mostly affected are people who are in the gig economy, right? Because there is no, for example, there's no safety net. For example, people who are in formal employment, at least we see the employers continue to retain them, albeit there could be some cuts in allowances. There may be some, salary reduction, whatever it is, taking half pay leave and all that, but there's still employment. The income might be slightly lower. But people in the gig economy, when they cannot go out and do their work, I mean, there's no income. So that part probably may not have been taken into consideration or computation when we talk about unemployment rate.
Yeah, so that's bringing me to the next question regarding how has the Malaysian government responded to mitigate the impact on businesses. And when we talk about businesses, as what you mentioned, we have the traditional employers, and also what you mentioned just now, the people in the gig economy. So the response from the government, what are they doing to help the employers, and how about the people in the gig economy? What's there for them? Some kind of safety that can be given to them.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I mean, it's interestingly, before I go to that, I just want to relate back to the mode of the Malaysian economy, because Malaysian economy, for example, we are very much an open economy. We do a lot of international trades, and the implication of the recession or the bigger contraction in the advanced economy will have a bigger impact on us, right? Because of that trade. So and then what we are seeing is that while Malaysian economy is quite robust and all that, we are not too susceptible to the changes in the advanced economy. But we could almost see there's this about 10-year cycle of recession happening in our country. So, I mean, if we were to plot all the way back to, say, for example, in the last 50 years, from 1970, it's almost like every 10 years there'll be a recession. For example, 1974 is the oil crisis, so we had a recession. And then in 1984, 1985, because there were collapse in commodity prices, so we had a recession. And then Asian financial crisis, I think many of us, I'm sure, would remember that is quite a big recession, negative 7% in terms of our contraction. And then global financial crisis, yeah, I mean, there's some small negative. I think there's also contraction. And then now, I think this year, what's happening to us. So taking cognizance of, for example, the need to resuscitate the economy, the need to protect, for example, like you mentioned, the people working in the gig economy, and the fact that the need to protect the segment which is, I would say, a lot more vulnerable, which is the small and medium enterprises. All right. I would say, I mean, people who work in the gig economy, many of them would fall within the small business segment, right? Small and medium business segment, but those in the gig economy will be a lot more in the small segments of that SME level. So that's why we see that the government is paying more focus on this particular segment. So, for example, there have been a few series of announcements about the economic stimulus program that was announced by the government. Okay, the first one that was announced was back in February, I think about 27th of February. That was announced by the previous Prime Minister at that time, PM number 8. Yeah, and it was mentioned that that kind of stimulus package consisting of about 20 billion in terms of initiative, in terms of goodies that are put in there. And then things are being tweaked along the way. I think after that, there's another 780 million that was announced. And then by the time we get into the new government, 25th of March, I think that's the big stimulus package that was announced. I think everybody will remember the amount is about 250 billion, out of which 100 billion of the 250 billion comes from the banking sector in the form of the moratorium. I'm sure everybody is aware, which is for the first time, I would say, that I can remember, the government has announced almost automatic moratorium for individuals and also for businesses within the SME segment. All right. So what does it mean? It means that for 6 months, from April until October, these borrowers, for example, people with loans, with financing, they do not have to service the installment for their loans and their financing, for example. So, and in terms of the cash flow impact of the savings that you do not have to service during that period, that's quantified at about 100 billion. But if you go into a bit detail in terms of what are the other things in there, there's a lot of relief that the government is doing specifically to the SME segments and specifically targeting to preserve employment, for example, because many of the schemes that was introduced as part of the stimulus package, if you notice, there's that condition attached. The condition is that you would be eligible to get this kind of relief, provided that you keep your employees. And we also see that the additional then, because we have that 250 billion, if you recall, then after that announcement there was still some requests coming from the SME to say that, hey, this is still not enough for the SMEs. Then on the 6th of April, I think about 2 weeks after the announcement, 27th of March, on the 6th of April, the government announced further 10 billion. And that further 10 billion, if you look at what's inside there, most of it are really targeted towards giving relief to the SMEs. For example, giving direct allowances to companies, which is meant to be channeled for the employees. For example, depending on the size of the company, and all employees who are earning below 4,000, for example, we get cash directly. But that's provided that the company retain the employee to be eligible to get this kind of allowances. There's also measures, for example, through EPF, through SOCSO, that makes it quote unquote cheaper, I would say, for businesses, especially in the SME segments, to continue to keep their employees. Yeah, for example, requiring slightly lower in terms of the EPF contribution, And all these are measures that are put in place specifically, like I said, I can reiterate, to give relief to the SME as businesses, at the same time to encourage them to retain their employees. Because like I mentioned just now, I mean, I mean, the economy is going to go into a contraction, but we need people to continue to have money to spend and all that, because spending is important. So if people are unemployed and all that, spending is not going to happen. It's just going to make the economy even worse. So other than that, so that was the stimulus package that was announced by the Prime Minister, right? So there have been like 6 announcements already, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, up to the one that I mentioned just now, the last on the 6th of April of 10 billion targeting to SME. But other than that, as a measure to again to make it cheaper for people who have got loans, who have got financing and all that, Bank Negara Malaysia has gradually been cutting rates. If you notice, for example, as a consumer, I'm not too sure whether you're aware, but as a banker, this is a moment that we really, monitor, because we, every change in the announcement that the government make will have a lot of impact to the banks. Yeah, that the government has been cutting rates. They call it overnight policy rate, OPR, but OPR drives the borrowing rate, or the loan rate, which the bank then impose on the customer. So a 10 or a 1% cut in the OPR will translate to a 1% lower interest on borrowing on loans for customers. So, for example, that in our economy, it's been since I would say in the last 10 years, the OPR has been hovering at between 3% to 3.25% level. And it was like that all the way until September. Then I think by, until 2019. So by September 2019, that's when the government cut the OPR by 0.25% first. But that was not because of COVID. That was because of the trade war. Like I mentioned just now, the economy is starting to slow down since 2018, 2019 due to the trade war issue that affects the economy. However, with COVID, the government has been cutting rates in January by 0.25%, in March another 0.25%, and the more recent in May, I think about 2 weeks ago, the government has cut by another 0.5%. So all in all, it's about 1% rate has been cut. Now 1% might sound small, but when you think about it from the perspective of your bank loan rate, right? Typically, I mean, for a bigger company, probably the borrowing rate for them would be about 5.5%. 1% cut means from 5.5%, it comes down to 4.5%, and it's quite significant saving in terms of the repayment that the borrower needs to make. So this is again also another measure. This is called the monetary policy that the government use again to make it cheaper, to provide some sort of relief for businesses. Okay, and why are all these measures put in place? Okay, because the importance of SME in the context of the Malaysian economy. The SME segment has been growing in terms of the growth a lot faster than the national GDP. For example, I can give an example in 2018 when the economy, our overall economic growth, GDP at 4.7%, but the growth in the SME segment is about 6.5%, 6.5%, right? And the composition of the contribution by SME to the economy has been higher year by year. In 2014, for example, SME makes up about 36% of our GDP. However, by 2018, it's already at about 38%. So that is in terms of contribution to the economy. But in terms of contribution towards employment, SME segment contributes more than 90% of employment in Malaysia. So that shows how significant SME is in the context of the Malaysian economy. Hence, that's the reason why many of these measures are put in place, and the target is really to help the businesses within the SME segment.
Okay. Wow, that's a more detailed explanation that I am now getting, now appreciating. So, what are the available financing reliefs available for
Okay,
SMEs? Because the impact is mostly felt by SMEs. So, with the financial reliefs, what are they? What are there out there?
okay. So Alhamdulillah, I think in Malaysia, there have been many I would say schemes that were made available to businesses within the segment, within the SME segment. And obviously, with COVID, via the economic stimulus package, there are even more relief that are made available. And because considering that probably many in the audience today also within this SME segments, you could be operating your own business and all that. I've shared some information there. You can have a look at it. But if I can take through some of this, uh, the main one that was made available immediately, I think in the beginning of March by Negara Malaysia through all the commercial banks, this what we call the special relief facility. Yeah, initially when it was launched, it was the size of about 3 billion. Then not long after that, due to good demand, overwhelming demand, the fund size was upsized from 3 to 5 billion. And then the last time that I checked, it has been doubled to about 10 billion. So in total, there's about 10 billion worth of fund for special relief facilities. These are really meant to help address working capital requirements for many of the SMEs. And the financing amount ranging from 100,000 to about 1 million ringgit. And the unique thing is that for this facility, there's a moratorium upfront of 6 months. So basically, the total program is about 5.5%. You can take your financing, 5.5 years. You can take the financing at the beginning, but the first 6 months, you do not have to start making repayment for the financing. It's only on the 7th month you pay. So the period that you pay would be 5 years. So total program is 5.5 years, including the moratorium. So I think that is the first one. The other one that is also made available, and the fund size is about close to 7 billion, will be all economic sector facility. This one is more of fund that is given also in terms of the term financing, which is up to 5 years, also made available through the commercial banks as well. When I say commercial banks, it's the normal, like the Maybanks, AMB, Bank Islam, and all that. These are all commercial banks, also targeted for the SME segment. So the special relief facility, the all economic sector facility, these are all facilities which is given to any type of businesses as long as you come under the definition of SME. Okay. And then the next one which is available would be through Bank Simpanan Nasional. They also have this microcredit, Prihatin, it's called. In terms of the facility, it's interesting because the loan is given at 0% interest rate. So all you need to do is just to pay the principal. And in terms of the tenure, again, it's 5.5 years. With 6 months moratorium in the beginning and 5 years repayment period. So all in all, 5.5 years. And in terms of the financing size, it ranged from 50,000 ringgit to 75,000 ringgit. So this one is more for the micro entrepreneur, yeah, not to the medium size. It's more towards the micro entrepreneur. And again, it's for all business sectors. So total fund size is about 700 million ringgit for this one. And then we have under CGC again, schemes for bis mula and also bis wanita. So the financing amount is about 300,000 ringgit. Again for SME, and the tenure again is for about 5 years. And the other one, which is through SGPP, which is a subsidiary of MOF, Syarikat Jaminan Pembiayaan Persekutuan. Syarikat Jaminan Pembiayaan Perniagaan. I'm sorry. This is more of a guarantee scheme. You see, because for example, sometimes it's a bit more difficult for small businesses to get loans from commercial banks, right? So what the government does is that it has this body that comes in to say that, okay, for certain type of loan financing, and it's really targeted towards helping the SME borrowers, for a small amount of fee, the government will give guarantee to the loan. So that makes it easier for the bank to process and ultimately approve loan applications for these SME businesses, right? So that is also available. Even though this is a guarantee, this is not a loan, but you know, when you couple this guarantee with the loan, it makes that financing facilities easier to be processed and to be approved for the SME businesses. So those are the financing facilities and all that we can talk about. The Prihatin stimulus package also contain, like I said, other than financing, it also contains some relief or incentives for employers, for example. So there's employer advisory services that is provided by EPF, whereby the service includes options for deferral of payments, restructuring, and also rescheduling of employer contributions, for example, right? So this is where, for example, you know, I mean, is a requirement under the law that all employees must make contribution to the employees. However, taking note that many of the employers are having difficulties now, and in order to, like I mentioned just now, make it the cost to retain employment to be lower for the employers. So that's why even EPF is saying to say that, hey, during this period, you do not need to make that contribution, but you need to go and, you know, meet EPF to apply for this, you know. I mean, if you don't apply, you need to continue making contribution. Otherwise, it's going to be an offense under the Act again. LHDN has also given same concession for businesses because there is that PCB installment, tax installment. So there's also a deferment of to pay the installment. And also, I've already mentioned about the loan moratorium, and the amount is quite significant because, for example, for the 6 months period, you know, the customer doesn't have to pay. And I can share with you, you know, for example, for a bank, even a small bank like Bank Islam, the 6 months period, the cash flow impact is about 3 to 4 billion ringgit in terms of the cash that the bank says, okay, you do not need to pay, you know, about 3 to 4 billion ringgit. So that's why in total for that 6 months, the whole system, the relief is about 100 billion ringgit. And then I also did mention about the 10 billion additional package that was announced, you know, about 2 weeks after the first 250 billion. So that has got the elements of which subsidy. So, for example, depending on the size of the businesses, so where the smaller the businesses is, the subsidy is higher given. For example, If the company have less than 75 number of employees, then the government will give 1,200 ringgit per month for each employee. But you know, when the company is a bit bigger and has between 75 to 200 employees, government will give 800 ringgit for each employee. And then if it is even bigger, more than 250 employees, then the government give about 600 ringgit per employee. So this is the one that I mentioned just now, and the mechanism that the government provide to incentivize employers so that they will keep their employees and do not terminate them during this difficult period. And then in terms of the additional relief, there's also that one-off 3,000 ringgit given to micro entrepreneurs, and you know, this alone amounts to about 2.1 billion ringgit, because it's estimated there's about 700,000 micro enterprises in Malaysia. So the ones that I mentioned just now are the measures that were introduced during the Prihatin relief scheme that was announced by the Prime Minister. But there's a point that I would like to make over here. If you look at all the relief measures that were announced, at the very least, among the eligibility requirements are that the business must be registered with SSM, and there must also be a tax record with LHDN. Yeah, because for example, that's how the government analyze and evaluate in terms of eligibility. So that's why it's important over here. I know that there's many businesses out there, especially the micro ones, who could be doing it, you know, I mean, do it as though it's a personal kind of businesses, may not be registered and all that. So I would encourage for business owners to at least register. You don't have to incorporate it as a Sendirian Berhad. You can just register it as an enterprise or even partnership, and also register for tax as well. Because you know, if you do not register for SSM, you do not register for LHDN, and you know, the relief that I mentioned just now may not be available to you. Okay, so other than the stimulus package, there are various other schemes that are available. For example, Tekun will have many different financing program for, especially for Bumi Putra business owners within the SME segment as well. I mean, there's various form. They have the Tekun Niaga financing scheme. They have that Arahnu as well under Tekun. So, but Arahnu is more like a pawn shop business. Okay, and they also have the Teman Tekun concept, where you know, it's almost adopting the business model that was adopted by Grameen Bank, for example. You know, it's a scheme whereby a group of people, in this case about 5 people, can obtain financing. But in a way, you know, you need to make sure that you know each other, you make payments properly and all that. So I'm not going to go into detail, but you can have a look at it. They call it Teman Tekun financing scheme, you know, similar to the Grameen Bank model. They have got the Teman Nita, which is similar in terms of financing given to a group of individuals rather than one after another. So the way how you want to apply for it, there must be about 5 of you. You know, you must know each other, and you apply. The loan will be given to you individually, but in a way, each person in the group needs to keep everybody honest and use the money wisely and repay according to schedule. Because if anyone within the group who miss payment or do not pay, you know, everybody in the group will not be able to get additional loan after that, you know. So this is a way where they use a bit of like peer pressure and monitoring within the group to ensure that, you know, all these loans are serviced. So
So maybe
Tekun
I
has,
just want to
yeah.
just want to mention to the audience that
Mhm.
As you are mentioning the various incentives over there,
Yeah.
what came to mind is that people who are drowning, they are clutching at straws and they do not know
Mm-mm.
where to get them. So that's why I just want to remind the audience to please download the information that Muazzam has given, because it is in one document.
Yeah.
You can see where all the initiatives are. Otherwise, you'll have to go searching for them. And as the analogy is that if you are drowning, you are clutching at straws, you might miss out on the initiatives that the government and the private sector, the banks are putting out,
Yeah.
because they are from different sources. Yeah.
Mm. And I would like to share as well, Cik Mazuki over here. I did mention just now that as it is now, there is this automatic moratorium that's given. I think that one is common knowledge already by now. Everybody knows that. So for for personal debt that we have, our own car loan, our own housing loan, that's given automatic, and even for business loans that you have, if you're within the SME segment, is 6 months automatic. So you do not need to service. Typically, what all banks do is that they just extend the period of repayment. Okay, so that you pay on the 7th month onward, and installment may vary. Most banks will keep the installment amount to be the same. Some banks may charge just slightly more, but that is given, that's automatic. However, during this period of 6 months, I would encourage all business owners, especially I'm addressing those people who are business owners here, no matter how big or small, to really assess again your cash flow requirements and projection. Because you need to remember, uh, the health situation brought about by COVID is not going to go away anytime soon. I was in a webinar with the another medical expert in this field, and he said, I mean, when we went into the MCO, when we went into lockdown, we thought that we go into a lockdown for 2 weeks. After that 2 weeks, it's back to normal. We can all restart our business and all that. But 3 months down the road, we know that that is not the case. And guess what? It's not going to be, things are not going to be go back to how it was before within the next 1 or 2 weeks, right? Because, for example, from the medical perspective, what I was told, what I was informed is that the earliest period that we are going to get vaccine, which is approved and all that to be made available, will be at least another year from now. But even having a vaccine, will not allow us to go back to normal, because with a vaccine, we need to have vaccination. And vaccination program is not going to be something that can be done within 1 week. We are a population of 31 million. You cannot vaccinate 31 million people within 1 week. So let's say it's going to take another year. So 1 year to come up with a vaccine, another year for the vaccination program, then probably we can say that our life can go back to the old normal. Right? So, and the economic impact of what we're saying now, while I'm not saying that it's going to be what we have seen in the last 3 months is going to persist for the next 2 years, but it's also not going to rebound quickly. So coming back to what I was saying is that this is why it's important for all business owners to go back, relook at your business. Definitely in terms of how you do your business and all that, it needs to be different. I mean, not to say post-COVID, but even during this period where the COVID is still going to be there among us, what we'll see is that, I mean, how it is under PKP, right? SOPs need to be put in place, business premises, for example, if it is restaurants, last time, probably at any point in time, they may be able to accept 50 patrons dining in. But now, due to the distancing required and all that, maybe they can only, accommodate 10 or 20% of their capacity. So income is going to be affected. basically, in terms of this will result in, I would say, inefficiencies in terms of operations and also ability for the business to earn money. And then in terms of operational costs will also rise because, for example, I mean, we know that, even at PKPB, you need to have the temperature check, you need to have the scanners, you need to have record that you need to keep and all that. And this will increase in terms of the operational cost. Um, and then that's the reason why uh, we cannot go on assumption to say that, okay, probably once the PKP or PKPB is uplifted, then my business will go back to how it was, back in November or December last year. It may not be like that. So I would encourage all business owners here to diligently relook at the business, relook at how your business is going to operate, within these 2 years, before we go back to the old normal, and the ability, the cash flow requirements that you have, and use this period to study that, and at the same time to approach your banker to work out a more suitable repayment arrangement for your existing loan. Okay, because in the pack that I shared just now, these are the new loans that, the new reliefs and all that. But I'm also aware that many of you have existing loans. So use this opportunity. Do not wait until it's a bit late. Use this earliest opportunity to study and go and approach your banker to work out a more palatable revised repayment schedule for your loans and financing.
And what you have just mentioned there relates to the question that was at the tip of my tongue to ask, because regarding the outlook for SMEs post MCO, because we are talking about MCO going on now is in the third month already. The reliefs are for about 6 months. However, as what you've mentioned, that the vaccine, according to the medical people, is between 12 to 18 months. That's when they can come up with a vaccine. After they come up with a vaccine, we are talking about maybe another year or year and a half before we can get the population vaccinated. So we are talking about 2 or 3 years operating at low efficiency economy. So what would be the outlook for SMEs?
Yeah, I think that's the reason why. I mean, looking at the economic projection, the official data is showing that, I did mention for Malaysian economy, Bank Negara has already put a forecast of some recession or contraction for 2020, kan? Because Bank Negara has said that it can be between 0.5% positive to negative 2% in terms of our economy because 2020. However, for 2021, it's already forecasted for a positive growth, probably at the level of about 5% in 2021. But having said that, that is also due to a lot of this kind of stimulus that are made available. But I guess it would be easier for the bigger companies because they have got more, I would say, financing facilities, credit lines available, and all that. A bit more vulnerable for the businesses within the SME segments. So that's why it is important, I would say, for them to realistically look at the earning capacity of their businesses going forward. But at the same time, I guess this is also a time for all businesses to relook at their business model. Okay, so probably we know that, for example, if a restaurant operator, you know that with this kind of situation, if you continue wanting to operate the business in the same way whereby you earn most of your revenue from dine-in businesses, you know that you cannot sustain that kind of model in the next 2 or 3 years, because I'm sure, you know, if your revenue, you know, goes down by, you know, like the analogy that I give just now, you know, you can only accept like 30% of patron, it means that your revenue comes down by 70%. Definitely, you know, it's going to be so difficult for you to be breaking even in your business. So this is also a time where I think it forces all of us, yeah, especially business owners, to relook and rethink about a new business model. So a classic example, which is commonly understood by everybody, probably now, for people within the F&B businesses, think about how can you do, you know, better in terms of the food delivery and all that, because that's how people consume. People still consume, but they consume it differently. They do not go and eat in the restaurant anymore. Probably they need to order. So for the restaurant operator, restaurant owner, you need to know how to be able to reach out to your customers better through food delivery services. And that example is similar for businesses even in other sectors as well. The unfortunate thing is that, for example, people within the hotel, tourism, you know, airlines, kind of industries, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to cope, I guess, within the next 2 to 3 years.
Because in those industries, we are talking about contraction in the region of 95% contraction of the business.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very tough in this
Very,
area. Yeah. So what I would like to do now is that maybe if it will be time for us to take some questions.
okay.
So one question that came in earlier was about the agricultural sector. So what do we have about the sector?
Okay, when you talk about agricultural sector, it's quite broad. For example, oil palm plantation is agricultural. But what is important, and probably the thing that probably we have not been having, I would say, enough progress into, would be in terms of agro-food. Because if you look at it, Malaysia is so dependent for import when it comes to our food. For example, we have got to even import rice. If you look at it, we've got to depend on imports for almost everything within our, you know, the food that we consume. Yeah. So that is a fact. So there, for example, especially for the agricultural sector, there are institutions such as, especially the Agro Bank. They have got various programs for agro food. And I know for a fact that maybe not so much in the past, but now even the commercial banks are starting to have financing program for those businesses within the agriculture, and especially more so in the agri-food businesses.
Okay, so that's an interesting distinction over there, and as you are mentioning that, when there is a crisis, there is also an opportunity. So people in the agricultural business may want to look into agro food because the opportunity for growth.
Yeah, because basically this is a sector whereby demand far outweigh the supply. So I mean, basic economy will say that, you know, whatever you produce, you'll be able to sell. Anyway, so and that's why the distinction is. I mean, if you look at the Malaysian economy, agriculture is big, but that big agriculture is due to oil palm plantation, for example. But what's important, where the demand far outweigh the supply, is in the food sector, the agro food. So I think this is a part that I guess something that we need to, you know, I mean, facilities are made available by the government. So probably it's also for businesses to start to do it in a commercialized manner. And a classic example, we can look at our neighboring countries. Yeah, for example, I mean, Thailand is a good exporter of agro-food product. For example, there's no reason why Malaysia, with the abundance resources that we have, that we cannot be equally successful.
Okay, let's move to that question that we have. What type of that question from Sumaya? What types of programs available for agro food that we can take advantage of? So
Okay, I mean there's many. What I know is that, for example, Agro Bank specifically have various kind of program for agro food. So I think you can refer to especially for Agro Bank in terms of the financing facilities available.
okay. And another question from Sumaya there is that, is this a good idea to jump to another industry now?
It depends. I said I would say yes if, let's say, you are within the industries that may be a bit difficult for you to operate while COVID is with us, and those are the kind of industries that I mentioned just now, in the hospitality, in the tourism, tour, or if you have got anything to do in within your supply chain to the airlines and all that, because we know that due to nature of COVID, that no matter what, is this kind of industries are not going to rebound anytime soon. So but for those within some other segments, may not be necessary for you to change the industry, but what is necessary that I think is that re-look at the business model, because the way how we live now is going to be slightly different. So the business model or the operating model for the business within the same industry probably needs to change. It doesn't mean that you've got to jump into other industries, because uh, COVID in a way affect all industries. I mean, there is no one industry that are spared. I would say. I mean, other than the glove manufacturers and also the PPE manufacturers. I think that's the only one, because if you look at even the stock market, the only stocks that are doing very well now are the glove maker stocks, and even the banks are taking a beating because it affects everybody in a way. I think about it in a way, because there is always a change in a chain in terms of business. I give an example. For example, people who operate the restaurant may not be able to operate the restaurant for this 3 months during the MCO and all that. Will go to the landlord and ask for no repayment during that 3 months or 6 months and all that, because I don't have income. But guess what? The landlord is also required to service the loan, because probably for the landlord to buy that shop lot, they also get bank loan. So the landlord will go then to the bank and say that I cannot service and all that. I mean, so there's always that chain effect in a way. So no industry is spared. Change in operating model is necessary, because we know that the revenue earning capability will be diminished compared to what it was before, due to this new normal that we have to adapt to.
The buzzword in the industry now is pivot. So how
Pivot.
do you pivot your business? So whether you are pivoting your business in terms of, when you mentioned about the model, in terms of the channels that you are going out, in terms of your offering, or pivoting from one industry to another. So that's the buzzword. So it is entirely up to the individual. And right now, all that I want to mention is that I'm grateful that the packages are being driven by the government in this way, because it is helping the people, because as what you mentioned, the people who are feeling the greatest impact of COVID are the small, medium, and the micro entrepreneurs. These are the people who are feeling the most. So I'm grateful that all of these relief packages are targeted towards them, and getting the banks to be working together in that sense.
Inshallah, I think because that that's why I think there needs to be proactiveness by the businesses as well to go and approach the banks. I can assure everybody here that all banks, I'm not just talking on behalf of Bank Islam, but I know that all banks would want to help their customers and all that, so that they can ride through this difficult period and be able to go back up again, very soon. Because when the customers, when businesses are not doing well or cannot survive, the banks are going to be affected as well. So I think the banks also would want to help, but but it's really the onus is a lot more on the business owners to proactively go and approach the banks, and also to do it quite quickly, because like I mentioned just now, while there's about 250 billion, 260 billion and all that, I mean there is there's many people who are affected. So you wouldn't want to start it a bit late, that suddenly the program has been fully subscribed and all that, whatever it is, right? So quickly, approach your banks if you need additional facilities and all that. Because at the end of the day, no matter how big the program size is, there is still a limit there. So we wouldn't want people here to, in a way, miss the boat to enjoy all these relief facilities.
Okay. So thank you very much for that. So I'm not noticing any questions yet coming in. So since there are no questions there, just to ask you, what are your a few words of advice that you can give to SMEs right now with respect to the products and services that are coming from both the banks and the government? So what advice do you want to give to them?
The first advice that I mentioned is that for those people who have not registered your business with SSM, with LHDN, please do so, because many of these facilities, and I believe that if there's going to be any additional new relief programs and all that, they will still put that eligibility criteria that these businesses must be registered. So please do so. Secondly is that all of us, I think we need to rethink about our business model and also our operating model. And probably for those people within, some of the big unfortunate sectors, think about probably a new sector for you to go in. And thirdly is quickly have a look at your own business and financing requirements, and proactively approach your existing bankers to work through your existing commitment. If let's say there is any need for some kind of deferment or rescheduling or restructuring of your facilities, you go and work it out with your respective banks.
Okay. So thank you very much for that very specific advice about registering with SSM, so that you don't fall out of the filter. Because without the SSM and LHDN, you'll fall off into the background, and there is no net to catch you. The other is taking a look at the business model sector, whether it is still relevant or how you can pivot from there. And a very practical advice regarding looking at the business and the financial requirements. So for those, especially for those entrepreneurs or micro entrepreneurs who have put the finance part to outsource to others, now for you to come in and to look at that personally. So with that, I would like to say thank you. Since we don't have any additional questions, already past tense, I would like to say thank you to Muazzam for being with us, being generous with your time and your expertise. And as I had mentioned at the beginning of this session is about bringing people with the expertise in their various areas, so that we get the right information in order that we can we can take action on right information rather than taking dangerous action based on misinformation or disinformation. So we are so grateful to Muazzam for being here, giving this specific information from the banking and also from the relief structures that the government is having. And I hope that for the participants who are here, you have gained some valuable information. And for those of you who are not from Malaysia, I know that there are a couple of you, I can see that Komolo and Ines there, they are from Brazil. So you need to translate whatever that Muazzam has mentioned to whatever reliefs that your government have. So in his presentation, Muazzam specifically detailed out what the Malaysian government is. At the same time, there are some general things that I hope Komolo and Ines you can take back with respect to where you are operating in Brazil. And with that, again, thank you very much, Muazzam, for being here. I really appreciate this very much. And before we end, I'd just like to I'm just laughing at the comment from Zahrin that good interview session, Uncle Mas, and good job to my CEO. And, I would just like to remind you about this series of interviews that we are having. It is about going beyond survival to long-term sustainable holistic wealth, where we invite various experts from various backgrounds to inform about the impact of crisis from their expertise. So this evening we have Muazzam from the CEO of Bank Islam Malaysia, and tomorrow we are shifting gears, moving into the area of family. So what we have for tomorrow is we have this interview with this lovely lady, parenting, going beyond survival in the new normal. And for tomorrow's interview, it will also be at this time at 9 p.m. Malaysian time. We'll be having Ibu Rose, who's very active, contributing in the area of parenting and children, as well as in the area of strong ladies who are into business, who are into making profession while raising families. So that's the area that we are going to go into tomorrow evening. So with that, I look forward to seeing all of you for tomorrow evening. And again, to Muazzam, thank you very much for being here. And to all of you, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.